Well, hello everyone. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me, and to all the people who is working organizing the conference. So today I will talk about young children's mobilities and everyday materialities, unfolding the pushchair. And this paper is partly based on a paper I wrote some years ago with Pia Christensen, although I have extended it towards some other themes and ethnographic examples. So I would like to start with this quote from Johan Uri from his book Mobilities, in which he talks about the relationship between objects and mobilities. So I will give you some seconds to read it. I will be coming back to it along the presentation. So to begin, I will briefly outline how children's mobility has been approached to then move towards the approach that I would like to take into this theme. So in the way it's been developed in the minority world, especially in the United Kingdom and Germany, the study of children's mobility has been largely focused on the everyday corporeal trips of children, school-age children, between home and school or between other activities, like leisure activities or extracurricular activities. And the analysis has been mainly focused on the independent character and the spatial scope of these practices. This research has made key contributions to how we understand how children's mobility patterns have changed during the last decades, particularly in terms of children beginning to be independently mobile at an increased age, at an increasingly smaller scope, spatial scope. In this approach, how children's independent mobility is understood is the trips that children perform on their own without the physical company of an adult. And this phenomenon of the decrease in children's independent mobility has been seen as detrimental for children's health, emotional and physical health, and social development. And also as a matter of concern in terms of an increase in automobility because of parents driving children around. But at the same time, this approach has been criticized theoretically because of the notion of independency, because it has taken a developmental approach in terms of assuming children as dependent beings and growing into independence as they grow into adults. So from this critical point of view, the studies of children's independent mobility have not critically addressed the notions of independence, childhood, and mobility. So more recent studies in children's mobilities have used notions such as interdependence, companionship, or relationality as a better way of understanding the complexities of children's mobile practices, highlighting the social character and the important role of peers, such as other children, adults, animals, but also artifacts or technologies such as mobile phones. In all these accounts, with a strong qualitative tendency or mix-up methods, approaches, children's mobilities appear as relational practices involving different forms of interdependencies between different agents. However, even within this approach, I identified two gaps. One of them is the focus on school-age children living unattended other age groups, such as babies and preschool children. And the other gap is in terms of focusing only on the everyday corporeal travel performed by children themselves, leaving unattended many other forms of movements that are also part of children's lives and societies. So what I suggest here is to move from children's mobility towards mobilities in children's everyday lives. And in doing this, I take the mobilities perspective as it has been developed by John Urry, Mimi Scheller, Tim Creswell, among many others. And the way in which they highlight the existence of many diverse forms of movements and how they are all interdependent and how we should try to approach and integrate these different forms of movement. So from the corporeal travel of people, animals, microorganisms and objects to the virtual, communicative and imaginative movement through which images, information, power and affects circulate in society. So this mobilities perspective draws on actor network theory, taking the key notion of circulation, and also how not only movement, but also the lack of movement, the blockage of movement, or the pause in movement are also relevant for understanding circulation. Actor network theory has also influenced what the so-called new wave social studies of childhood. And here a key concept is that of hybridity. And in this sense, it's about how we understand childhood going beyond the dichotomies of the nature, culture, social, technological, the agency, structure, local, global characters of childhood, but also childhood in relation to adulthood and humans in relation to non-humans. From this perspective, Nicola Ansel has suggested one possible approach aiming at overcoming the local, global, and the agency structure debates in children's geographies. And she asks, what happens to the scaling of children's geographies if children are seen as nodes of material connections to places near and far, nodes that are embodied, perceiving, acting, expressing, connected with other humans and objects, both natural and social beings, but not fully our autonomous agents? A focus on the mobilities of children's everyday lives instead of just the mobility of children's lives is what can enable us to make visible the material connections in the sense that Nicola Ansel is saying here. Children are, as she argues, connected to places near and far through manifold means. When seen from this view, even when children experiences are bounded to the family, the home, the school, the local, their lives appear as connected in many ways to people and events occurring far beyond the boundaries of their perception spaces. But for a mobilities approach to children's lives, to be able to make visible these connections, we need to consider not only the movements that children themselves perform, but also the movements of others, for example, objects, people, policies, and information towards, about, and around children. And when approaching young children's lives from this perspective, two main observations arise. First is the interdependent character of joint family practices that are involved in young children's mobilities. And the second is the key role of materialities and technologies in articulating these practices and shaping children's mobile experiences. And also the methodological potential that observing these materialities can have. So now I will share with you 4 ethnographic accounts. The 2 first are focused on bracelets. One of them is located in Chile and the other one in England. So in around 2010, I was working in Santiago, Chile, in a project about everyday mobility and inequality in Santiago. And within this project, I did a small fieldwork with children between 2 and 6-year-olds. And in that context, I met Lara. Sorry, I can't share the video now. Sorry, we can't see the video now, but I will tell you about it. So Lara, she was a 2-year-old girl who lived with her mother and grandfather in a flat in the city center, so a very busy area of the city. Lara went to nursery every day, and getting there involved walking, taking the bus, and underground. I did this trip with them a few times. On one of these days, when her mom picked her up from nursery, she gave her a party bag that a friend had sent to her. The previous weekend, Lara had been unable to attend her friend's party because she was ill. Now her mom had seen her friend's parents, and they had given her the party bag they saved for her. Lara was excited to open it outside the nursery before starting the trip back home. Among other items, it contained a pink plastic bracelet that was the focus of her attention as soon as she found it. She put the bracelet on and off, walked around the nursery's front garden, touching the plants and walls with the bracelet, and put it on before going out to the street. She fiddled with it while waiting for the bus at the bus stop. When the bus came, it was very crowded, with lots of people standing on the corridor. Her mom found one seat and sat with Lara on her lap. I stood near them and was able to observe how Lara kept focused on the bracelet, still putting it on and off, and she never stopped touching it until she fell asleep on the bus. So Lara's bracelet was not a permanent object in her everyday travels and was not a key artifact that allowed her to be mobile, and most likely she does not have it or remember it today. However, as soon as the bracelet and Lara found each other, there was an instant connection, a physical and emotional attachment, as it is many times the case with bracelets and jewelry. An affect that runs between the bracelet, Lara, her mother, and her friend, to whose birthday party she could not attend. An affect and materiality that also extended to the unknown, unobserved, and probably unconscious place of a faraway factory in which the bracelet was made. The bracelet in itself had various roles or agencies, some of which can be observed in this brief account. It connected Lara to her friend and his party, even though she was not there, and in this sense it extended her friend's presence and hers. It enabled her to ignore the noise, touch, smells, and general busyness of the bus, and to fall asleep. And it extended my own agency as a researcher towards a place that I could not observe for myself, her friend's party and the relationships between them. Now, the second account is about a different kind of bracelet, the cara. So when I was working in England, in a small town, doing my PhD research, working with children between 0 and 5 years old and their families, I started noticing that many of the babies and young children I met, they wore a golden or silver bracelet, and also their parents and grandparents. So I started asking about it, and I learned that it was one of the symbols of the Sikh religion from Punjab. I didn't know about this because in Chile that's not a very common population and religion, but it is in England. And I learned then that this was one of the 5 essential symbols of Sikhism. And in many occasions, this bracelet had been brought by the grandparents of the children when they went to Punjab in a sacred trip, and they brought it back for their grandchildren. So the cara was an object that had moved with grandparents to their grandchildren. The bracelet became then an object that continuously accompanied children in their bodily movements, becoming part of them and other at the same time, forming a hybrid of humanity, organic and mineral matter, religion, family relationships, and affective ties. At the same time, the bracelet was a trace of past movement. It signaled the recent trips of their grandparents to India or elsewhere, where the bracelets were purchased. It also signaled movements performed in a more distant past, such as the migratory movements of their grandparents. as a product of which these children were wearing a cara in this town in 2013. It also signaled how the Sikh religion and customs had moved together and probably been transformed on the way with the people that carried them across wars, continents, and cultures. The cara around babies' wrists trespassed geographical scales, while babies remained unaware of the significance and history of this detachable part of their bodies. Their connections to faraway places, past histories, movements, and people were embodied around their wrists in the cara. And now the third story is in the same town in England. So when I was there, I had been already for a long time, and I was thinking the UK was involved in the military conflict in Afghanistan in that time, and I couldn't see any traces of this in this town until I met Horace, a 2-year-old boy, and his mother, Josephine. So his dad was in the army, and he lived most of the time in a military base in the UK, but sometimes he was also abroad. And when Horace was 6 months old, his dad had been sent to a military base in Afghanistan. So this is how Horace's mom told me about the time. We will Skype every week so that Julian wouldn't miss any of the milestones. You know, Horace's speech developed so much since the day he left in January. When he came back, you could actually have a conversation with him. Sometimes Horace would sit here in the evenings because of the time difference. So only certain days and times we could Skype. So it will usually be evening time for us. So just before going to bed, I'd let him watch a little bit of CBeebies. And he sits down and has a milk, you know, calm down. And I will bring the iPad in here and he will Skype. Horace understood that he could see his daddy on the video and he will talk to him and will show him drawings that he made with the childminder, things like that. Then, of course, emails. I sent photos regularly, and also in return, Julian will turn the camera and show his accommodation, his tent. So Horace knew his daddy was on a tent and things like that. We both had an iPad, so it was easier to walk around. If we hadn't had that, it would have been really, really difficult. But we also send little parcels out, so we'd make something, or us will make something and put it in a parcel and drop to the post, and we'd say, we're gonna send this to Daddy now. And when he got it, he will show it on the camera. I got your parcel, Horace. So there are 3 points I illustrated in this account that I would like to talk about here. So first is how virtual and communicative mobilities mobilized this armed conflict taking place in Afghanistan into the life of this very young child, but in a very domestic way, from the sofa of his home while having a milk and watching television. And at the same time, it mobilized the life of this young child towards Afghanistan. And second, in this account, we can see a myriad of interdependent forms of movement that are combined in this child's experience. So from walking to the post to leave this parcel, to his dad traveling abroad, all these different forms of movements were not separated but integrated in Horace's and his family's experience of physical separation. And in this way, and this is the third point I want to make, through all these forms of mobilities, like Skype, mobile phones, tablets, and so on, this child and this father were able to be parent and child to each other. So they were being related through all these forms of mobilities. And we can see here how one form of movement has an impact on a different form of movement, because when this father came back, he was not a stranger to his child when they met again physically. And methodologically, this account also shows all the things that I would have missed if I was only looking at the physical movements of this boy, in which case his life would have appeared as a very local life. And the last account is unfolding the pushchair. And here, still in the same town in England, I met this family. But in general, at some point of the fieldwork, I realized that in terms of physical movement of people, I never observed any travel between a child and an adult in which they were moving on their own without any artifact in between. So there was always some kind of object or artifact or technology mediating their mobile practices. And here I'm going to focus on the pushchair, which was one of the most common ones in this town. So observing the pushchair, I saw, for example, how it made a big difference in these girls. Well, I'm going to talk about this particular family, Lillian, Jasmine, and their mother, Gabriela. So it made a big difference in how Lillian interacted with other people she was moving with, and also with the environment around her. It made a big difference in how she related to me, for example. So when she was on the pushchair, I was talking mainly to her mom, whilst when she was walking, we were both talking about the things we encountered on the way. I also observed how the pushchair was actually made out of many different parts. So for example, in this image, you see the cocoon, which is something you can attach to the bottom of the pushchair, and it's where the baby will sleep. But you can also take it out and use it independently. And they relied a lot on this part of the pushchair, and it shaped which places were suitable or not for them to go to. I also observed how the pushchair was always used in relation to other means, for example, the bus, the car, the street, and in this sense, situated knowledge of the mother was very important on how to use it and whether she could use it or not in relation to other technologies or artifacts. So the pushchair's mobile affordances were partly defined by its own design and materiality. This involved particular representations of children's physical and motor development, family compositions, and mobile practices, as well as safety regulations. However, its affordances were also defined in relation to other entities and characteristics of this specific mobile assemblage. So in the image of the pushchair assemblage at the bus stop, we can visualize some of the elements that come together in this particular practice. We see the different parts of the unfolded pushchair joined together through its design, and materiality standing on the pavement, carrying two children, while some of them sleeping. A plastic cover is being attached to it so that the girls are protected from the rain and the wind while waiting for the bus. And although we cannot see the bus, we see the timetable informing passengers about when the bus will come. This timetable has been defined elsewhere, but it's materialized in this bus stop, determining how long the girls and the mother will wait. And we see Gabriel's body pulling the whole assemblage together through her bodily strength, knowledge, and capabilities. So to conclude, each of the four ethnographic accounts presented here are centered on one object and the assemblage within which each artifact acted in this case. A plastic bracelet, the cara, an iPad, and a pushchair. They all are in different ways mobile objects that travel across distance, enable people to travel forming complex hybrids, move other objects, move implying that other people do not move together with people, remind us of past movement, or possess such value that people travel great distances to see for themselves or to get them for their grandchildren. Each of them involves particular materials, functions, knowledge, regulations, and values that are used in culturally and geographically specific contexts by differently enabled human bodies, staged by diverse institutions, built and natural environments. In the observed context, these objects highlight the relationality and interdependence of young children's mobilities. On the one hand, in relation to other people, and in this sense, the objects reveal themselves as mediating between the children and others, either by enabling their physical or virtual contact, facilitating their joint corporeal movement, or by circulating affects between them. On the other hand, in relation to the same our objects and technologies. Okay. So the specific ways in which these materialities are enrolled and mobilized into children's mobilities are shaped by and filled with changing values, meanings, economic and cultural context. In this sense, the fact of movement, the representations, discourses, practices, and experiences that constitute particular constellations of mobilities intersect with particular constellations of childhood in each of the described assemblages. I will finish there. Thank you. Oh, and I also wanted to mention that this book has been, it's just being published. Actually, the paper copies were not ready yet, so I couldn't bring any, but it will be soon. It's co-authored with Leslie Murray, Children's Mobilities, Interdependent, Imagined, Relational. Thank you.